Alright, let's go. Number 10. Megalania, the giant lizard that ruled Australia before we arrived. In 1859, the British anatomist Sir Richard Owen received a small package from the Antipodes, 3 vertebrae, collected from a tributary of the Condamine River in eastern Australia. The bones were unlike anything previously documented in the fossil record. Owen identified them as belonging to an enormous monitor lizard, larger than any reptile then known to walk on land, and gave the creature a name that meant ancient great roamer. He called it Megalania prisca, and over the next century and a half, scientists would slowly piece together the full nightmare of what this animal had been. The species, now formally classified as Varanus priscus, is the largest terrestrial lizard ever to have existed, reaching estimated lengths of between 4.5 and 7 metres, with some specimens potentially exceeding 8 metres. Weight estimates vary wildly due to the fragmentary nature of the remains, ranging from 97 kilograms up to nearly 2,000 kilograms, but even at the lower end of those numbers, Megalania would have been an apex predator without rival across the Australian continent. Its closest living relative is the Komodo dragon, which kills prey through a combination of ambush attack and toxic bacterial infection delivered through serrated bite wounds. Megalania was 3 times larger. It had a bony crest above its eyes, recurved teeth with infolded enamel, designed to slice flesh from bone, and osteoderms embedded in the skin of its snout and neck for armouring. Its limbs were uniquely proportioned, unlike any modern monitor lizard, suggesting hunting behaviours that have no living analogue. The fossils place it across a broad range of Pleistocene Australian habitats, including open forests, woodlands and grasslands, and the youngest confirmed remains date to approximately 50,000 years ago. That date matters more than any anatomical detail. The first humans arrived in Australia roughly 65,000 to 50,000 years ago, crossing open ocean from Southeast Asia in vessels we have no physical evidence of, and emerging onto a continent, unlike anywhere else on Earth. Megafauna unique to Australia: the giant diprotodon, the marsupial lion Thylacoleo, the colossal kangaroo Procoptodon, the snake Onambi, the bird Genyornis. All of it waited for them. And so did Megalania. The encounters between the first Aboriginal Australians and a 6 metres predatory lizard with venom-tipped serrated teeth must have been catastrophic for some of the earliest arrivals. And there is no archaeological way to reconstruct the encounters that ended in deaths beyond the fossil record itself. The species disappears from the record within a few thousand years of human arrival. The pattern is consistent with what happened to nearly every other piece of Australian megafauna. The hunters became the hunted. Fire was used to clear the landscape, and the entire ecosystem that had sustained the giant goanna for 2 million years collapsed within geological seconds. What makes Megalania particularly unsettling is not just its size, but the fact that it survived long enough for human beings to encounter it. Aboriginal oral traditions across Australia preserve stories of giant lizards and goanna ancestors' songlines tracing the paths of enormous reptiles across the continent, and totemic associations with creatures whose dimensions have no living equivalent. Some researchers, including the cryptozoologist Rex Gilroy, have argued that these stories preserve genuine cultural memory of Megalania encounters passed down through 50,000 years of oral tradition. The mainstream scientific consensus is that the lizard was extinct long before any of these traditions could have crystallised, but the alignment between the fossil record and the ethnographic record is striking. Enough that the question cannot be entirely dismissed. And the truly disturbing aspect is that the youngest Megalania fossils have not been definitively dated. The species may have persisted in remote parts of Australia for thousands of years longer than we can currently confirm, surviving in pockets of forest and outback, while the rest of its world was consumed by human expansion. Number 9. Smilodon fatalis, the dirt-toothed cat that ruled the Americas. The first Smilodon tooth was identified in 1875 at the Hancock Asphalt Quarry at Rancho La Brea, California, and over the following 150 years, more than 2,000 individual Smilodon fatalis have been recovered from the same network of asphalt seeps in what is now downtown Los Angeles. The site contains over 166,000 individual cat bones, making the La Brea tar pits the single largest assemblage of any saber-toothed cat anywhere on Earth. The reason for the concentration is grim. The asphalt seeps acted as a continuous death trap across tens of thousands of years, ensnaring herbivores that wandered too close to the gooey surface, and then ensnaring the predators that came to feed on the trapped herbivores. Smilodon was drawn to the site again and again, generation after generation, until thousands of them lay preserved in the same black ooze that had killed them. The species itself was a nightmare of specialised anatomy. Smilodon fatalis stood roughly 1 metre tall at the shoulder, weighed up to 280 kilograms, and possessed upper canine teeth that could reach 28 centimetres in length, protruding several inches below the lower jaw, even when the mouth was closed. The cat could open its jaws to a gape of over 110 degrees more, than 50% wider than a modern lion in order to fit those serrated dagger fangs around the throat of large prey. Its forelimbs were extraordinarily robust, built more like the front legs of a bear than a cat, and were used to wrestle prey to the ground before the killing bite was delivered. Recent biomechanical reconstructions suggest the bite itself was relatively weak by modern feline standards, only about a third the force of a lion's bite, but the strike was not designed for crushing. It was designed for precision. The cat would pin the prey, drive its canines into the throat or neck to sever major blood vessels, and then withdraw to wait for the prey to bleed out. The technique minimised the risk of breaking those irreplaceable teeth on bone. Smilodon fatalis appeared in North America roughly 2.5 million years ago and persisted until approximately 13,000 years ago, with the youngest confirmed specimen at La Brea dated to that exact window. Its disappearance coincides almost precisely with the arrival of human hunters across the Americas and the megafaunal collapse triggered by the Younger Dryas. For tens of thousands of years before that disappearance, however, Smilodons shared the landscape with the first humans to enter the continents. The Clovis culture, hunting mammoths and mastodons across an Ice Age landscape teeming with predators, had to navigate territory occupied by saber-toothed cats whose hunting style was specifically designed to take down large, slow-moving prey, and humans armed with stone-tipped spears were exactly that. Direct evidence of Smilodon predation on humans has not been recovered, but the absence is more revealing than damning. The acidic conditions that destroy human remains across most of the Americas would have destroyed any Smilodon kill site within a few centuries, leaving only the asphalt-preserved record of the cat itself. What we have are the cats, more than 2,000 of them with their saber teeth still intact and their forelimb bones bearing the healed fractures of countless violent kills. What makes Smilodon particularly unsettling is what its anatomy tells us about its behaviour. The healed injuries preserved in the La Brea bones include shattered hip sockets, broken jaws, and crushed ribs, all of which had healed before death. An animal with a broken hip cannot hunt. An animal with a crushed jaw cannot eat. The fact that these individuals survived their injuries suggests social behaviour, food sharing, and group cooperation across extended periods of recovery. Smilodon may have hunted in coordinated packs, like modern lions, with multiple individuals participating in ambushes and bringing down prey larger than any single cat could handle. For early human bands moving across the late Pleistocene Americas in groups of perhaps 20 or 30 individuals encountering a coordinated pride of dirt-toothed ambush predators in a forested ravine would have been a death sentence for whoever the cats targeted first. Number 8. Pachycrocutta brevirorostris, the giant short-faced hyena that scavenged hominid bones. In 1893, the French paleontologist Marceline Boule described a massive hyena skull recovered from sediments at Saint-Zel's in central France, dating to the early Pleistocene. The specimen was unusual in its proportions, with a shortened snout, immensely robust jaws, and dental architecture suggesting a bite force capable of crushing the largest bones of any mammal then alive. The species was eventually formally named Pachycrocutta brevirorostris, meaning thick hyena, with the short snout, and over the following century, fossils of the same animal would be recovered across an enormous range stretching from southern Africa through Spain, France, Italy, the Balkans, the Caucasus, and as far east as China and Korea. The species existed for nearly 7 million years from the late Miocene until its extinction approximately 400,000 years ago, and during the entirety of the early Pleistocene, it shared the Eurasian landscape with the first hominids ever to leave Africa. Pachycrocutta brevirorostris was approximately 110 kilograms in average weight, with the largest individuals approaching 130 kilograms, making it the size of a modern lioness and the largest hyena that has ever existed. It stood roughly 1 metre tall at the shoulder, slightly taller than a modern spotted hyena, but built with significantly more bulk in the forequarters and skull. Biomechanical analysis published in 2011 by Paul Palmquist and colleagues estimated that its bite was capable of fracturing the femur of a juvenile elephant. And at sites across Eurasia, the broken and chewed remains of large prey species, including hominids, are found alongside the coprolites and bone fragments of the giant hyena itself. At the early Pleistocene site of Fuente Nueva, 3 in southeastern Spain, archaeologists have recovered evidence of a pachycrocuta latrine, more than 220 fossilised hyena droppings, deposited in close proximity to one of the oldest assemblages of Olduvai stone tools ever discovered in Western Europe. The hyena and the early human were occupying the same landscape at the same time, and the hyena was eating most of what the human killed. The competition was not abstract. At D. Menezes in modern Georgia, where the oldest hominid remains outside Africa have been recovered and dated to approximately 1.85 million years ago, fossils of Pachycrocuta brevirostris are among the most common carnivore remains at the site. Some researchers have argued that the giant hyena, rather than the saber-toothed cat Meganterion, was the actual predator responsible for the bite marks on certain hominid skulls recovered from the D. Menezes deposits. Whether or not Pachycrocuta directly killed Homo erectus at D. Menezes, the hyena absolutely scavenged hominid bones across its entire range. The dental microwear and isotopic analysis of multiple specimens recovered from the site has demonstrated regular consumption of primate remains, and the bone-cracking power of the species was such that very little of any given carcass would have survived a single feeding session. What makes Pachycrocuta particularly disturbing is the implication of its hunting strategy. Unlike modern spotted hyenas, which engage in a mix of hunting and scavenging at roughly equal rates, the giant short-faced hyena was likely more dependent on kleptoparasitism, the theft of carcasses from other predators. The species would have cued in on saber-toothed cats and lions, making kills across the open Pleistocene grasslands, then arrived in numbers sufficient to drive the original predators away from the carcass, and consume it down to the smallest fragment. For early human populations attempting to extract meat from kills they had made themselves or scavenged from other predators, the arrival of a Pachycrocuta clan would have meant immediate retreat or death. Population densities of the giant hyena at certain sites were high enough that hominids could not have safely scavenged at all without risking encounter. And the species may have been one of the primary ecological reasons that early hominid expansion into Eurasia took as long as it did. Pachycrocuta brevirostris went extinct around the same time that the modern spotted hyena, Crocuta crocuta, expanded its range out of Africa and into Eurasia. The giant species was outcompeted by its smaller, faster, more adaptable cousin, and by approximately 400,000 years ago, the largest hyena that ever existed was gone. The hominids, who had been pushed around by it for nearly 2 million years, inherited a world without it, and they would not have to contend with anything like it again. Number 7. Homoeotherium latens, the scimitar-toothed cat at Schöningen. In 1995, German archaeologists working at a brown coal quarry near the town of Schöningen in Lower Saxony recovered something unprecedented in the archaeological record. Buried in waterlogged sediment dated to approximately 300,000 years ago, the team led by Hartmut Thiem excavated a series of wooden spears, perfectly preserved in the anaerobic mud, each one carefully shaped from spruce wood and balanced like a modern javelin. The Schöningen spears are the oldest complete hunting weapons ever discovered, and their existence demonstrated that pre-modern hominids, likely Homo heidelbergensis, were capable of cooperative big-game hunting at a level previously assumed to have emerged much later in human evolution. Then, in 2014, the same archaeological layer that had produced the spears yielded something that no one had expected. Among the bones of the wild horses that the spears had been used to kill lay the teeth and humerus of a saber-toothed cat. The species was identified as Homoeotherium latidens, the European scimitar-toothed cat, and the find represented one of the youngest specimens of Homoeotherium ever recovered in Europe. Homo therium had originated in Africa approximately 4 million years ago and had spread across North America, Eurasia and back into Africa over the course of the Pliocene and Pleistocene, persisting for so long that members of the genus encountered virtually every species in the human evolutionary lineage from Australopithecus through to Homo heidelbergensis. The cat was built differently from the more famous Smilodon. Its body was longer-legged, more cursorial, adapted for running down prey across open landscapes rather than ambushing from cover. Its sabres were shorter and more curved, scimitar-shaped rather than dagger-shaped, designed for slicing rather than stabbing. Its forelimbs were less robust, suggesting a different killing style. An analysis published by Mauricio Anton and colleagues in 2005 argued strongly that Homo therium hunted in coordinated groups, using its endurance and pack tactics to wear down prey across long distances. Adult Homo therium reached approximately 200 kilograms in weight, comparable to a modern lion, and its preferred habitat was exactly the kind of open mosaic environment that early hominids exploited for their own hunting. At Schoningen, the cat and the humans were sharing the same landscape and competing for the same prey. The recovered humerus from Schoningen carried marks consistent with use as a percussion tool by humans, indicating that the hominids had access to at least one Homo therium carcass and were extracting bone, material for use as a striking implement. Whether the cat had been killed by humans, scavenged from a natural death, or recovered after some other event remains unclear, but the proximity of the bone to the spears tells a more important story. Pre-modern humans were hunting in a landscape that contained scimitar-toothed predators, and they were doing so with weapons designed for cooperative confrontation with large, dangerous animals. The Schoningen find was not the first evidence of hominid-Homo therium overlap. At Untermassfeld in Germany, an early Pleistocene site dated to approximately 1 million years ago, Homo therium remains have been recovered alongside cut-marked bones, suggesting hominid butchery activities. At Venta Micena in Spain, dated to approximately 1.6 million years ago, the cat appears to have functioned as the apex predator across the entire region, hunting horses and bison in open habitat that hominids would have crossed regularly. What makes Homo therium particularly unsettling is the evidence of its persistence. For most of the 20th century, paleontologists believed the species had gone extinct in Europe approximately 300,000 years ago, with the Schoningen find representing one of the youngest confirmed dates. Then, in 2000, a fishing trawler off the coast of the Netherlands dragged up a Homo therium jawbone from sediments that had once been part of dry land during the last glaciation. Radiocarbon dating placed the specimen at approximately 28,000 years old. The cat had survived in Europe for over 250,000 years longer than anyone had believed, persisting deep into the late Pleistocene and overlapping with anatomically modern Homo sapiens. Across the European continent, the implications are unsettling. The early modern humans who painted the Chauvet cave 36,000 years ago, who carved the Lion Man of Hollenstein Stadel, and who buried their dead with red ochre and ceremony, were sharing the European landscape with a saber-toothed pack predator that we had assumed was long extinct. The cats they encountered were the last of their kind, and somewhere in the dwindling forests of late Ice Age Europe, the final Homo therium drew its last breath, while the species that would replace every other hominid on Earth painted images of the predators they had outlasted. Number 6. Haast's eagle, the giant raptor that hunted humans on a continent without mammals. In 1871, a Canterbury Museum taxidermist named Frederick Richardson Fuller was working through a collection of bones recovered from a former marsh at Glenmark in the South Island of New Zealand when he noticed something unusual in the assemblage. Among the moa bones and other avian fossils were the remains of an enormous bird of prey with talons longer than those of any living eagle and a wingspan that suggested aerial dimensions previously undocumented anywhere on Earth. The bones were sent to the geologist Julius von Haast, who in 1872 formally described the species and named it Harpagornis morae. Subsequent genetic analysis has reclassified the species into the genus Hyraetus, but the bird is still commonly known by the name of its original describer, Haast's eagle, and it remains the largest eagle that has ever existed. Adult specimens weighed between 10 and 18 kilograms, with females larger than males, exceeding even the harpy eagle of South America by a significant margin. Wingspan estimates range from 2.6 to 3 metres. The talons reach the size of a modern tiger's claws, and analysis of the skeletal proportions suggests the bird could dive on prey at speeds approaching 80 kilometres per hour. The eagle's preferred prey was the moa, the flightless bird that dominated the New Zealand ecosystem for the entire span of the Holocene before human arrival. Multiple species of moa existed across the islands, with the largest, the South Island giant moa, reaching 3.6 metres in height and 250 kilograms in weight. Haste's eagle hunted them by perching on isolated treetops or rocky outcrops, identifying targets in the open landscape below and then diving into the moa's hindquarters with sufficient force to knock the giant bird off its feet. The talons would lock onto the pelvis, the powerful legs would absorb the impact, and a second strike would crush the moa's skull through the back of the neck. Bone evidence recovered from moa skeletons across the South Island shows the characteristic puncture wounds of Haast's eagle predation, and the eagle and its mate would remain on the carcass for several days. Before moving on to the next hunt, the Māori arrived in New Zealand sometime between 1250 and 1000. 280 CE, finding an ecosystem that had developed for tens of millions of years without any terrestrial mammalian predators. Birds occupied every ecological niche that elsewhere on Earth was filled by cats, wolves, bears, and foxes. The first humans to step onto the islands encountered a world in which the apex predator was not a mammal but a bird, and that bird was watching them from the treetops. Maori oral tradition preserves the memory of the puakai, an enormous black and white bird with red plumage at its head, said to seize and devour men, women, and children. The hokioi, described in similar terms in other accounts, was reputed to be a descendant of the star Rehua dwelling in the mountains, and only rarely seen on the days it chose to fly. The folklorist Elsden Best recorded multiple traditions in which these birds carried off humans for food, and the cave drawings of South Island rock shelters depict birds with the proportions of giant raptors, descending on figures that may have been intended to represent people. The biological reality matches the legends. Haast's eagle had talons capable of killing a human child instantly, and a wingspan and grip strength sufficient to potentially carry off small individuals or kill larger ones with a single dive. Smaller golden eagles, which weigh only a fraction of what Haast's eagle weighed, have been documented killing prey as large as sika deer and bear cubs. A bird that specialised in killing 250 kilograms flightless avians had no anatomical limitation that would prevent it from killing a person. The encounter was brief in geological terms. Within roughly 150 years of Maori arrival, the moa were hunted to extinction by the new human settlers, and Haast's eagle, which had specialised exclusively on moa as prey, lost the foundation of its food chain. The eagle followed its prey into oblivion, with the last confirmed remains dating to approximately 1445 CE, just 165 years after the first Polynesian canoes had reached the South Island. What makes Haast's eagle particularly haunting is the brevity of the overlap. For perhaps 6 or 7 generations, human beings shared the South Island with the largest eagle that ever existed, and during those generations, the bird was actively hunting them. The traditions recorded by 19th century European observers were not myths invented to entertain children. They were recent memories, passed down through 20 to 25 generations of Maori storytellers, describing encounters that had genuinely occurred in the lifetimes of their direct ancestors. The puakai had been real, and it had been killing them. Number 5. Ursus spalaeus, the cave bear that contested the caves of Ice Age Europe. In 1774, a German pastor and amateur naturalist named Johann Friedrich Esper published a book titled Newly Discovered Zoolites of Unknown Four-Footed Animals, in which he described enormous bones recovered from caves in the Franconian Jura. Esper believed the remains belonged to dragons or unicorns. By 1794, the anatomist Johann Christian Rosenmüller had correctly identified them as belonging to a previously unknown species of bear, which he named Ursus spalaeus, meaning bear of the cave. Over the following 2 centuries, more than 100,000 individual cave bear skeletons would be recovered from sites across Europe, making Ursus spalaeus one of the most thoroughly documented species in the entire Pleistocene fossil record. The bear was enormous. Adult males weighed between 400 and 1,000 kilograms, with the largest specimens approaching the size of modern Kodiak bears and stood up to 3.5 metres tall on their hind legs. Females were significantly smaller at 225 to 250 kilograms, but still considerably larger than any modern brown bear. The species had a steeply domed forehead, a short, broad muzzle, and a body built for hibernation in the deep cold of European glacial winters. Cave bears spent more time in caves than any other ursid in history, retreating into the same cave systems used by Neanderthals and later by modern humans for shelter hibernation and the rearing of cubs. The competition for caves was relentless. Across the entirety of the Middle and Late Pleistocene, hominid populations and cave bear populations occupied the same limestone systems, often in alternating cycles as one would drive the other out. And as climate shifts forced both species deeper into shared territory. The bones recovered from sites across France, Germany, Romania, Spain and Italy frequently include both cave bear remains and hominid tools, and at sites like the Chauvet Cave in France, the relationship is preserved with disturbing clarity. The Chauvet Cave contains over 3,700 cave bear bones, more than 90% of all animal bones in the entire cave system. A single Ursus spalius skull was discovered placed deliberately on a limestone block in a chamber now called the Salle de Crâne, the chamber of the skull. The skull had been positioned with care, possibly by Neanderthals or by early modern humans, and had been covered in a charcoal layer suggesting ritual treatment. Similar arrangements appear at multiple sites across Europe. The Drachenloch Cave in Switzerland, excavated between 1917 and 1923 by Emil Bachler, yielded the remains of more than 30,000 cave bears, including a stone cyst containing arranged bear skulls. At Régordu in southern France, a rectangular pit contained the bones of at least 20 bears, covered by a massive stone slab, with a Neanderthal burial nearby, accompanied by bear bones interpreted as grave offerings. At Basura Cave in Italy, a vaguely zoomorphic stalagmite was surrounded by clay pellets in what appeared to be a Neanderthal ritual site centred on cave bear veneration. What these arrangements meant to the people who made them remains unknown. They may represent the earliest evidence of religious thought in any hominid species, predating modern human burial customs by tens of thousands of years. The cave bear was not primarily a predator of humans. Isotopic analysis of bones from Peszter Cuasi in Romania has demonstrated that Ursus spalaeus was overwhelmingly a herbivorous with diet patterns more similar to modern pandas than to grizzly bears. But a herbivorous bear weighing up to 1,000 kilograms was still capable of killing a Neanderthal or a Cro-Magnon with a single swipe. And the bones recovered from numerous sites show evidence of opportunistic encounters that ended badly for the hominid involved. Neanderthal remains from the Hohlefels and Sergenstein caves in Germany show injuries consistent with bear attacks, and at Drachenloch, where 30,000 cave bear skeletons were recovered. The few hominid bones in the assemblage are heavily damaged. What makes the cave bear particularly unsettling is the duration and depth of the relationship between the species and our ancestors. For at least 200,000 years, hominids and cave bears competed for the same shelter, often within a few metres of each other, across the same dark stone galleries. The bears entered the caves first to hibernate, then the hominids would arrive when the bears were dormant, occupy the front chambers, light fires, leave their tools, and depart before spring brought the bears out of their sleep. Sometimes the timing failed. Sometimes a bear emerged early, or a hominid pushed too far into the cave, and the encounter ended with a 1,000 kilograms predator finding 70 kilograms of intruder in its hibernation chamber. The cave bear went extinct approximately 24,000 years ago, during the last glacial maximum. The reasons remain debated, but the most likely explanation is a combination of climate change, declining availability of vegetation, and competition with humans for the caves themselves. By the time the species disappeared, modern humans had been displacing them from their hibernation sites for thousands of years. We took their caves, we left their skulls on our altars, and then we erased them. Number 4. The African crowned eagle, the bird that killed our ancestors. In November 1924, A quarry worker at the Buxton Lime Works near the town of Town in northwestern South Africa pulled a small skull from the limestone breccia and brought it to the attention of the geologist Robert Burns Young. Young recognised the find as significant and forwarded it to the anatomist Raymond Dart at the University of the Witwatersrand. Dart spent the next 2 months carefully extracting the skull from its limestone matrix, and on February 7, 1925, he published his findings in the journal Nature. The Town Child, as the specimen would come to be known, was the first recognised member of a previously unknown hominid species which Dart named Australopithecus africanus. The fossil represented a juvenile individual, approximately 3 to 4 years old at death, and it was 2.6 to 2.8 million years old. The skull was small. The brain volume was approximately 400 cc's, comparable to a modern chimpanzee. But the position of the foramen magnum, the opening at the base of the skull through which the spinal cord passes, indicated bipedal posture. The Town Child had walked upright. The species was a transitional form between the apes and us, and the small skull recovered from the South African limestone was the holotype that would define one of our oldest known ancestors. For 70 years, the question of how the Town Child had died remained unanswered. The skull bore unusual marks, and the surrounding sediments contained the bones of small mammals, birds, and reptiles, but no clear taphonomic explanation existed. Then, in 1995, the South African paleoanthropologists Lee Berger and Ron Clark proposed something that overturned the entire interpretation of the site. They argued that the tongue assemblage matched the prey accumulations created by modern African crowned eagles in the Thai forest of Ivory Coast. The crowned eagle, Stephanoetus coronatus, is the most powerful raptor in Africa today, weighing up to 4.7 kilograms and capable of killing antelope-sized prey through aerial ambush. It feeds primarily on monkeys, drops the carcasses at favoured feeding perches, and over time builds up bone assemblages with characteristic damage patterns. In 2006, Berger published a follow-up paper in which he identified specific marks on the eye sockets of the Town Child, gouges and punctures that exactly match the talon damage seen on the skulls of monkeys killed by crowned eagles. The Town Child had been killed by an eagle. Subsequent work by Berger and the primatologist Scott McGraw, published in 2007, identified additional scratch marks across the orbital, frontal temporal, parietal, and occipital regions of the skull that further confirmed the eagle predation hypothesis. The earliest known specimen of one of our oldest known ancestors had been seized by a bird of prey, carried off, killed, and consumed. The crowned eagle in question, or its prehistoric ancestor, would have been only marginally larger than the modern species, but the Australopithecus africanus child would have weighed only 9 to 11 kilograms, well within the range of prey that modern crowned eagles routinely kill and transport. The implications extend far beyond a single fossil. If crowned eagles or their ancestors were preying on early hominids 2.6 million years ago, then aerial predation by raptors was a significant evolutionary pressure across the entire span of the human lineage. The fear of looking up, the instinctive recognition of shadows passing overhead, the social grouping behaviours that protect children from above, all of these may have been shaped by birds that hunted our ancestors from the sky for millions of years. What makes the Town Child particularly haunting is the specificity of the predation. The eagle did not kill an adult Australopithecus. It targeted a child. Modern crowned eagles preferentially prey on juvenile monkeys because they are easier to catch, easier to carry, and easier to dispatch. The same biomechanical logic applied to early hominids. Children of Australopithecus africanus were within the size range that crowned eagles could easily handle. And the Town site likely represents only one instance of a pattern that played out across the African landscape for millions of years. Adult hominids would have lost their children to the sky again and again, finding only blood-soaked tree stumps and scattered bones to indicate what had happened. There is one additional disturbing footnote. In 2019, a 4-year-old boy in Ethiopia was attacked by a martial eagle, a related but smaller raptor than the crowned eagle. The bird targeted 3 children in the same incident, killed one of them, and was shot by villagers before it could complete a second kill. Aerial predation by African eagles on human children is not a prehistoric phenomenon. It happened the day before yesterday. Number 3, Panthera spelaea, the cave lion that hunted alongside Neanderthals. In 1810, the German geologist Georg August Goldfuss described the fossilized remains of an enormous lion-like predator recovered from Zullifen Cave in Bavaria. The animal was significantly larger than any living lion and had clearly inhabited European caves and open landscapes during the Pleistocene. Goldfuss named the species Panthera spelaea, the cave lion, and over the following 2 centuries, fossils of the same animal would be recovered from a range stretching across the entire Eurasian continent and into eastern Beringia in North America. Adult cave lions weighed between 300 and 360 kilograms, in the largest specimens approximately 25% larger than the largest African lions alive today. They stood roughly 1.2 metres at the shoulder and reached body lengths of up to 3.5 metres. Cave paintings from sites across France, particularly the Chauvet Cave, depict cave lions in detail unmatched by any other prehistoric carnivore, allowing us to know that males of the species lacked the substantial manes characteristic of modern lions, and that the coat colour was a uniform tawny grey suited to hunting on the mammoth steppe. Genetic analysis published in recent years has confirmed that Panthera spelaea was a distinct species from the modern lion, though closely related, and that it functioned as the apex predator across the mammoth steppe ecosystem alongside the cave hyena, the wolf, and the brown bear. The cave lion overlapped with multiple hominid species across its range. Neanderthals, Denisovans, and modern humans all encountered Panthera spelaea, and the encounters were consequential. In 2010, a partial skeleton of an early lion species, Panthera physalis, was recovered from the Grandolina site at Atapuerca in Spain. Layer T Dun 0, one dated to roughly 350,000 years ago. The bones bore numerous cut marks, indicating that the lion had been butchered by hominids, possibly hunted directly. The pattern repeated across European sites for the next 300,000 years. At Caverna della Fate in northern Italy, Neanderthal cut marks on a cave lion skeleton suggest skinning at the end of the last interglacial. At the Bollamore Cave in Spain, dated to approximately 130,000 years ago, evidence indicates Neanderthal butchery of cave lion remains. At Chez Pinot in France, similar marks appear on bones dated to roughly 65,000 years ago. The most disturbing and most direct evidence comes from the site of Siegsdorf in southeastern Germany, dated to approximately 48,000 years ago. The skeleton recovered there belongs to a subadult male cave lion. On the 8th left rib of the skeleton, researchers identified a deep puncture wound measuring 3.3 centimetres in length and 1.5 centimetres in width. Forensic and taphonomic analysis, published in 2023 by a team led by Gabriele Russo, concluded that the wound had been caused by a wooden spear thrust into the chest cavity of the lion during a Neanderthal hunt. The cave lion had been killed by a Neanderthal hunter using a spear of the same type recovered from Schöningen, then butchered for meat and pelt. The pelt itself, identified through phalange evidence at Einhornhöhle in Germany, dated to approximately 190,000 years ago, was processed in such a way that the claws were left in place. Modern taxidermists reserve this technique only for special trophy skins. Neanderthals were keeping cave lion pelts as trophies. What makes Panthera spelaea particularly haunting is the cultural significance the species clearly held for the modern humans who eventually replaced the Neanderthals across Europe. The Lion Man of Hollenstein-Stadel, carved from mammoth ivory approximately 35,000 to 40,000 years ago, depicts a humanoid figure with the head of a cave lion. It is one of the oldest known sculptures of any kind, and it represents a deliberate fusion of human and lion identity. The Chamber of Felines at Lascaux, the engraved cave lion images from the Vogelherd Cave, the perforated cave lion canines, worn as personal ornaments at sites across Aurignacian Europe. All of these speak to a relationship between modern humans and Panthera spelaea that was not merely predatory, but symbolic, religious, and identity-forming. The lion was both threat and totem, both rival and inspiration. The species went extinct approximately 12,500 years ago in Central Europe, with Beringian populations persisting slightly longer. Its extinction coincided with the end of the last glaciation. the collapse of the mammoth steppe ecosystem, and the megafaunal extinction event that wiped out most of the largest mammals across the northern hemisphere. The cave lion did not survive the world its prey could no longer support. The humans who had hunted it, painted it, and worn its teeth as ornaments inherited the empty landscape it left behind. Number 2. Dinofelis, the terrible cat that specialised in hominids. In 1924, the same year that the town child was discovered, the Dutch paleontologist Eugène Dubois proposed a new genus name for a series of cat fossils recovered from sites across Africa, Eurasia, and North America. The animal had been classified under various names during the late 19th century, but the new designation captured the essence of what it had been. Dubois named it Dinofelis, meaning terrible cat. The genus contained multiple species, ranging in time from approximately 5 million years ago down to roughly 1.2 million years ago, and ranging in geography from the cradle of humankind in South Africa to the Savalik Hills of India and beyond. Dinofelis was somewhat smaller than the more famous saber-toothed cats, weighing between 70 and 100 kilograms, slightly larger than a modern leopard, but smaller than a lion. Its sabres were shorter than those of Smilodon or Meganterion, leading some paleontologists to classify it as a false saber-tooth, a transitional form between the conical-toothed cats and the dirk-toothed specialists. The shorter sabres gave it greater versatility. It could ambush from cover, climb trees and tackle a wider range of prey than the more specialised saber-toothed species. And in southern Africa, between approximately 4 million and 1.5 million years ago, what it preyed on included our ancestors. The case for Dinofelis as a hominid hunter was developed most thoroughly by the South African paleoanthropologist Charles Kimberlin Brain, known throughout the field simply as Bob Brain. His 1981 book, The Hunters or the Hunted, presented one of the most disturbing arguments in the entire history of paleoanthropology. Brain examined the fossil assemblages from sites at Swartkrans, Sterkfontein and Kromdraai in the cradle of humankind, where hominid remains had been recovered alongside large quantities of carnivore bones. He noticed that certain hominid skulls bore precisely spaced puncture wounds in the cranium, and that the spacing matched the canine dimensions of Dinofelis. He proposed that the cat had been a specialist primate killer hunting Australopithecus africanus and Paranthropus robustus from the open grassland habitats they occupied, ambushing them at the entrances of caves, where they sheltered and dragging the bodies deeper into the cave systems to be consumed. The cave deposits at Swartkrans and Sterkfontein, according to Brain, were not the homes of early humans. They were the larders of Dinofelis. The hominid bones recovered from those sites were the leftover scraps of meals consumed by the terrible cat 2 million years ago. Subsequent isotopic analysis has complicated the picture, but has not eliminated the predatory relationship. Carbon isotope ratios from Dinofelis specimens at Swartkrans suggest the cats were preferentially hunting grazing animals like antelope rather than hominids. And contemporary felids like Meganterion and the leopard show stronger isotopic evidence of primate consumption. But Dinofelis remains have been recovered in close association with hominid remains at multiple sites, including Bolt's Farm in South Africa, where bones of both species accumulate in a natural trap suggesting Dinofelis was lured into the trap by the prospect of consuming primates that had become stuck there. And the puncture wounds on the Paranthropus skulls at Swartkrans match the dimensions of Dinofelis canines too precisely to be dismissed entirely. What makes Dinofelis particularly disturbing is the duration of the relationship. For approximately 4 million years, members of the genus Dinofelis hunted across the African landscape alongside members of the hominid lineage. Multiple species of Australopithecines, the early Homo lineage, the robust Paranthropines, all of them shared their entire evolutionary history with the terrible cat. Generations beyond counting of our ancestors lived in fear of the species. Children were taken. Adults were killed at the edges of forests. The grasslands of southern Africa were not a safe place to be a small hominid, and the cat that made them dangerous had teeth specifically suited to puncturing the skulls of primates. The species went extinct approximately 1.2 million years ago, during a period of climate change that fragmented the forest habitats it depended on for ambush hunting. By the time it disappeared, the hominid lineage had survived its predation for longer than any other relationship between predator and prey in the human evolutionary record. Number 1. Crocodilus anthropophagus, the human-eating crocodile of Olduvai Gorge. In 2010, the American paleontologist Christopher Brochu and his colleagues Jackson and Zhao, Robert Blumenschein and Llewellyn Densmore published a paper in the journal PLOS One describing a new species of fossil crocodile recovered from the Olduvai Gorge in northern Tanzania. The specimens had been collected from sediments dated to between 1.845 and 1.839 million years ago in the same geological window as the type localities of Homo habilis and Paranthropus boisei. The crocodile was unusual in its anatomy. It had triangular horns above its ears and a relatively deep snout, features superficially resembling the recently extinct Malagasy crocodile Voi robustus. But the genetic and morphological evidence placed it firmly within or adjacent to the modern genus Crocodilus. Most disturbingly, hominid bones recovered from the same sediments bore the unmistakable bite marks of the new species. Brochu and his colleagues named the animal Crocodilus anthropophagus. The name means human-eating crocodile, and it is the only species in the entire fossil record to be formally named for the act of consuming our ancestors. The specific epithet, anthropophagus, was chosen specifically because the bones recovered from Olduvai documented direct predation on Homo habilis and Paranthropus boisei. The crocodile had eaten them. It had eaten enough of them across enough deposits that the entire species was named for the practice. Crocodilus anthropophagus reached lengths of approximately 7.5 metres, comparable to the largest modern saltwater crocodiles. The bite marks recovered on hominid bones from Olduvai, however, suggest the attacks were carried out by subadults rather than fully grown specimens. Larger adult Crocodilus anthropophagus would have consumed entire hominid bodies without leaving traces, swallowing them whole or crushing them so completely that no fossilizable bone fragments would survive. The marks we have come from cases where the crocodile took only part of the body, or from attacks that were interrupted, or from instances where the prey escaped briefly before dying. The actual death rate inflicted by Crocodilus anthropophagus on the early hominid populations of Olduvai is impossible to calculate, but the fossil evidence suggests it was substantial. Olduvai Gorge in the early Pleistocene was a wetland-dominated ecosystem, with rivers and lakes feeding extensive marshes. Hominids depended on these water sources for drinking, foraging, and cooling. Every approach to the water carried the risk of encountering the apex predator that lived in it. Modern Nile crocodiles in Africa kill an estimated 300 people per year in unprotected rural areas, and the Crocodilus anthropophagus of Olduvai was larger. Equally aggressive and operating in an environment where human populations had no engineering defences, no firearms, and no organised response to predator threats. The hominid populations of Olduvai must have lost members to crocodile predation on a regular basis, and the loss must have shaped their behaviour, their settlement patterns, and their relationship to water across hundreds of thousands of years. What makes Crocodilus anthropophagus particularly horrifying is what it represents about the broader relationship between hominids and crocodilians. The Olduvai species was not unique. Across the Pleistocene of Africa, multiple species of large crocodiles inhabited the same wetlands as our ancestors. The fossils recovered from Lake Turkana, the Omo River Basin, and other early human sites consistently include crocodile remains, often in the same sediments as hominid bones, often with damage patterns indicating predation. The species we eventually became evolved alongside crocodiles that ate us, drank from waters that contained creatures longer than our boats, and adapted our behaviours over millions of years to minimise the catastrophic risk of approaching the wrong shoreline at the wrong time. Some researchers have argued that the human relationship to water itself, our universal anxieties about murky depths, our cultural prohibitions against bathing alone, our religious associations between water and supernatural threat may be partially shaped by the millions of years our ancestors spent being eaten by crocodiles. The fear is older than our species, and the predator that drove it is preserved in the fossil record under a name that means exactly what it did. Crocodilus anthropophagus persisted for an unknown duration after the deposits at Olduvai were laid down. The species eventually went extinct, replaced by smaller forms of crocodile that survive into the present, but the precise timing of its disappearance remains unclear. What is certain is that for the entire span of early human evolution in East Africa, a 7.5 metres horned crocodile waded in the shallows of every lake and river, occasionally taking children and adults alike, and that the bones recovered from Olduvai represent only the smallest fraction of the deaths it caused. Every drink of water our ancestors took for hundreds of thousands of years was a potential ending, and the species that killed them is named for the act because there was no other way to describe what it had done. We are the descendants of the survivors. Every human alive today comes from a lineage that managed to drink from wetlands without being seized, that climbed away from cave lions, that recognised eagle shadows in time, that fled from the sabre teeth of cats with names that mean terrible. The fossil record preserves the predators that hunted us, but the deeper record preserves itself in our nervous systems, in our instincts, in the involuntary tightening of our chests when we sense something wrong in a quiet forest or a still body of water. Those reflexes were not built in a generation. They were built across millions of years of being prey to creatures that no longer exist, and they remain inside us, still scanning the tree line, still watching the shoreline, still waiting for predators that have already gone extinct. We outlasted them all. But the fear they left in us is the only memorial they have. If you want to see more videos like this, click the video on screen now and make sure to subscribe.